The politics of climate in focus once again at the 30th edition of the United Nations Climate Change Conference, COP30. Well, leaders from around the world are in Brazil's Belém, the gateway to the lower Amazon, for a two-day summit ahead of next week's main event. But notably absent, leaders of China, the US, India and Russia, four of the world's top 5 emitters. The US president has previously dismissed climate science as, quote, a con job. Host Brazil admits it faces an uphill battle, but says it's not seeking a major deal. Instead, it wants to send a clear signal that countries have not given up on the climate fight. AP correspondent Isabel Debray is covering this story for CNA from Belém in Brazil. Isabel, set the tone for us going into COP30.
Well, the setting of this conference is everything. As you mentioned, we are on the edge of the Amazon rainforest, and this is especially important when you think about where the last 2 UN climate talks were held, in the major oil-producing nations of Azerbaijan and the United Arab Emirates. And so Brazil is actually an oil-producing nation, but it is completely different to host this at really, the edge of the world's greatest rainforest. And President Lula has made that very clear, that this is a huge priority, not only because of all the threats to the Amazon rainforest that we've been seeing with wildfires and illegal logging and deforestation in various ways, but also because of the importance of the rainforest in absorbing carbon dioxide, which warms the planet. It is a huge way, and really a cheap way, for countries to completely stabilize the climate. And so the setting is really everything here. And President Lula has also made clear he wants to increase indigenous representation. This is indigenous land. But I will say that there are a lot of logistical headaches that have come along with this. Really, one reason is because Belém is quite small. It actually only had 18,000 hotel rooms before COP, and usually tens and tens of thousands of people descend on the conference every year. So we had to see that a lot of poorer nations and some representatives were struggling to get places, couldn't afford to get hotel rooms. So along with the importance of this location, of course, has come those challenges.
Absolutely. Now, Brazil, the host, has acknowledged it is going to be an uphill battle. It's quite a low bar, that sounds, is being set. How's it planning to tackle that?
Yes, so Brazil, of course, has mentioned that, it wants this to be a different kind of COP. Every year, countries come together, they make so many different kinds of promises that in many ways are very lofty and that they can't keep. For instance, in 2021, we saw countries come together and they pledged to reduce methane emissions by 30%. And actually, that ended up being completely off track. So what we're seeing now is the desire to really turn those promises into more concrete solutions. But as you mentioned, that is going to be challenged by the absence of some of the world's biggest emitters.
Yeah, you mentioned that 4 out of the world's 5 most polluting economies are absent from the summit. Does it matter?
Excuse me? Sorry, can you repeat?
Well, 4 of the 5 top emitters aren't there at the moment. Is their presence going to be missed?
Yes.
Will it affect what can be achieved?
That is a really good question. That's a question that we're all really looking to see what happens with that. And one of the reasons that actually some people do have hope is that, even though the United States is not sending anyone from the government, actually other countries, including China, sending the deputy prime minister, of course, this is not the highest level representation, but other countries are present. And, the European Union, France, Germany are sending their highest representations. Lula, the president, has been engaging with countries all over the world, from Africa to Latin America. And so some experts that we've talked to are even saying that, without the United States, of course, that does damage the spirit of multilateralism, but perhaps it could also leave room for more countries to kind of fill that void and to prevent one country from just completely dominating the discussion. So there are people that do have hope that progress can be made, even without the President of the United States coming, and even without some top officials from other major countries that do produce most of the world's emissions.
All right, really appreciate that. That was AP correspondent Isabel Debray covering this story for CNA from Belém, Brazil.